Have you ever wondered what would happen if you suddenly lost everything? Your friends, your family, your sense of belonging. What would you do when the world feels like it's crashing down around you? Amara and Aaliyah stood at the entrance of the hallway, the buzzing voices of their high school echoing around them. A new day, same old feeling. The halls were crowded with students, most of them rushing to their classes. But there was one thing that never changed for them. The whispers, the glances, the snide remarks that followed them like a shadow they couldn't shake off. Amara tucked a strand of her long, dark hair behind her ear and shot a quick glance at her twin sister, Aaliyah. Her twin's eyes met hers, the familiar unspoken understanding between them clear. They'd been through this 1,000 times before. "Did you hear what they're saying about us today?" Aaliyah muttered, her voice just above a whisper. "Let them talk," Amara replied coolly, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "They don't know us." But deep down, Amara felt the weight of the words hanging in the air like an invisible storm cloud. The constant teasing, the name-calling, the sideways glances, these things were part of their daily lives at Crestwood High, a mostly white school where they, two black girls with long hair and an undeniable strength, never seemed to quite fit in. The twins had grown used to being different. They had learned to ignore the taunts, the insults, and the mocking stares. But there were days like today when it felt like it was all too much. And it wasn't just the usual cruelty of high school, it was something darker, something more dangerous. As they walked down the hallway, their footsteps almost synchronized, a group of boys passed by. Amara recognized one of them instantly. Bradley, a senior who seemed to have made it his personal mission to make their lives miserable. "Look, it's the freak twins," Bradley sneered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. His voice dripped with mockery. "I guess being black and having long hair means you think you're special, huh?" Aaliyah's grip on her backpack strap tightened, her knuckles turning white. Amara could feel the tension radiating from her sister, but she kept walking, her face expressionless. They had learned to take it, to not let people like Bradley get under their skin. But then, out of nowhere, Bradley stumbled. His foot caught on the edge of a locker, and he went sprawling onto the floor with a loud thud. It was one of those moments that in another world might have been a funny accident. But not here, not with Bradley. The hallway erupted in laughter. "Watch where you're going, man," one of his friends yelled, and Bradley quickly scrambled. To his feet, his face flushed red with embarrassment. Amara felt a flicker of something. Was it satisfaction? No, it wasn't that simple. She didn't want to be like him, taking pleasure in someone else's misfortune. But it was hard to ignore the sweet irony of watching someone who had tormented them for months trip and fall in front of everyone. Bradley, now standing up and brushing himself off, shot a venomous look at Amara. "This isn't over," he growled under his breath. But Amara just raised an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't scared. Not anymore. As the crowd began to disperse, the twins continued their walk toward their next class. But the atmosphere was thick with tension. Amara could feel the eyes on her back. The world felt heavy, pressing in on her, and she knew today would be one of those days. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Aaliyah shot her a sideways glance, but Amara didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what to say. Her mind was already racing ahead, trying to anticipate what might come next. But one thing was for sure. They weren't going to let Bradley, or anyone else, get away with it for much longer. The storm was coming. Amara and Aaliyah were younger. Their world was different. They didn't have to worry about snide comments or stares that seemed to linger longer than they should. Growing up in their tight-knit neighborhood, they were surrounded by people who understood them, people who shared their culture, their values, their history. They didn't need to prove anything. Being black, being strong, being themselves was enough. But that was before they moved here, before Crestwood High, before they were forced to confront what it meant to be two black girls in a sea of white. Faces where their strength was seen as a threat, their confidence mistaken for arrogance, and their very existence something to be ridiculed. Their mum had always pushed them to be their best. She worked 2 jobs to provide for them, making sure they had everything they needed to succeed. When they were younger, She'd tell them stories about their ancestors, how they fought for freedom, how they never backed down. She always said, "You are strong, don't let anyone tell you otherwise," and for a while those words were enough. But when they arrived at Crestwood High, things started to change. Aaliyah remembered the first day they walked through the school gates, the stares, the whispered comments, the way the other students seemed to automatically assume they didn't belong. At first, they didn't let it bother them. They kept their heads down, focused on their studies, their training. After all, they weren't just any girls, they were black belts in karate. Their father had trained them since they were little, teaching them discipline, patience, and the art of self-defense. They could handle anything life threw at them, or so they thought. But the more they tried to fit in, the harder it became. They weren't just different in the eyes of their classmates. They were outcasts. And no matter how hard they tried to ignore it, the bullying and racism seemed to follow them everywhere. Amara thought about the first time it really hit her, the first time she realized that this school wasn't going to let them be just another pair of smart, strong, confident girls. It was in gym class. They had been partnered up for a dodgeball game, and Amara had just thrown a perfect shot, knocking one of the opposing players out of the game. The whole class had cheered. But when the teacher turned his back, one of the girls, Emily, whispered, loud enough for her to hear, "You're lucky you can actually throw, considering you're—" You know. The sting of those words hadn't left Amara. The assumption that just because they were black they weren't capable of doing something as simple as playing sports, let alone excelling, was all too real. As for Aaliyah, it was the constant microaggressions, the way people would compliment her hair but then touch it without asking, the way they'd ask questions like, "Are you really from here?" as if being born and raised in the US somehow made her a foreigner. But the worst part was that despite everything, they couldn't fight back. Not directly, not without making things worse. Their mother had always taught them to stand up for themselves, but at school, the rules were different. If they fought back, they'd be labeled as the aggressors. If they stood up to the bullies, they'd be the ones in trouble. No one cared about the words or actions that had led them to this point. Amara could feel the resentment bubbling inside her. She didn't want to keep her head down anymore. She didn't want to pretend like everything was fine when it wasn't. One day, while they were walking to lunch, Aaliyah spoke up for the first time about what had been bothering her. "Amara, I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice tight. "I hate feeling like I'm invisible, like we're not even seen here." Amara looked at her twin, her heart aching at the pain she saw in Aaliyah's eyes. She'd always been the stronger one, the one who could hide her feelings behind a mask of calm. But even Aaliyah, the more reserved twin, was starting to crack. "I know," Amara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel it too. But what can we do? We've been doing everything right, staying out of trouble, keeping to ourselves. But it's never enough." Aaliyah's gaze hardened. "It's never going to be enough, is it?" Amara didn't have an answer. The truth was they'd tried to fit in, tried to be the good girls who didn't rock the boat. But now it seemed like that wasn't going to get them anywhere. They were done being invisible. Done being the quiet girls who let the bullies have their way. And that was the turning point. The moment when Amara and Aaliyah realized that if they were going to survive here, if they were going to be respected, they were going to have to fight back. But not just any fight. This wasn't going to be about fists or harsh words. No, it was going to be about strength. Strength in a way no one expected. They had a secret, a deadly one. A secret that had been passed down from their father. One that could change everything. Amara squeezed Aaliyah's hand, the unspoken promise between them clear. "We don't need to take this anymore." Aaliyah nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "Let's show them what we're really made of." And with that, the twins made a silent vow. It was time to fight back. But this time, they weren't going to back down. They weren't going to hide who they were. They weren't going to let anyone push them around anymore. No one would be able to ignore them for long. They just didn't know yet how far this battle would go, or what kind of people they would become in the process. But they knew one thing. It was only a matter of time before the storm broke loose. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks that followed the day in gym class felt like a slow, steady build-up to something inevitable. Amara and Aaliyah knew they couldn't keep ignoring the whispers, the taunts, the way their classmates would act like they weren't even there unless they made a move. They could no longer just fit in or pretend that everything was fine. It wasn't. They started to train harder. Their father had always taught them the value of discipline, and they'd never taken their martial arts lightly. Black belts weren't just pieces of cloth to show off. They were a symbol of mastery, of control, of power. And that power was something the twins had barely begun to tap into. Training after school had become their escape. They would head to the gymnasium, where the sound of their fists landing against heavy bags echoed through the empty space, filling the air with a sense of purpose. It was there in the silence of the gym that they began to channel everything they had, the frustration, the anger, the fear, and turn it into something greater. Their father had told them once, true strength doesn't come from fighting for others. It comes from fighting for yourself. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Prove it to yourself. Those words always stuck with Amara, especially now. She realized that, all along, they'd been fighting to fit into a world that wasn't ready for them. But what if they didn't need to fit in? What if they could make the world adjust to them instead? One afternoon, after a grueling session in the gym, Aaliyah wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked over at her twin. Amara had always been the more driven one, the one who pushed harder, who strived to be perfect in everything she did. But today there was something different in her eyes, a flicker of determination. "Amara," Aaliyah said, stepping forward, "we need to do something about Bradley. He won't stop. And if we keep letting him get away with this..." She paused, her fists clenched. "It's only going to get worse." Amara nodded, catching her breath. "I know, I've been thinking about it too. He's not just a bully, he's dangerous, and he's not the only one. There's a whole crew of them." The words were heavy, but they were true. It wasn't just Bradley. They had a whole group of students who targeted them, making their lives hell whenever they could. It was subtle at first, the comments, the stares, the random little things that only added up over time. But now it was blatant, and Amara and Aaliyah had had enough. "We need to make a statement," Amara said, her voice low but fierce. "We're not going to let them bully us anymore. We've got the skills, we've got the power, and we've got each other." Aaliyah's expression softened, but her eyes burned with the same fire. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, her body preparing for what was to come. "But how? If we fight back, we'll be the ones in trouble. They'll twist everything around." "That's the thing." Amara's lips curled into a half-smile. "We don't need to fight them in the way they expect. We're going to show them something they can't ignore. But we need to be smart about it. We need to make them understand that messing with us comes with consequences." The twins knew they had to plan carefully. They couldn't let their emotions control them, not when everything was at stake. They had to make the bullies feel the heat without actually throwing punches, or else they'd risk everything. Amara's mind started to race, calculating their options. If they attacked directly, the administration would take the bullies' side. But if they used their martial arts in a way that couldn't be ignored, they could make an impact. Aaliyah crossed her arms, considering her twins' words. "So, what's the plan?" "We wait for the right moment," Amara said, her eyes gleaming with the spark of something unspoken. "We let them push us one more time, just one more time, and then we strike. Not with fists, but with something else, something they'll remember." It was the perfect strategy. Let their enemies dig their own graves. They had always been underestimated, and that would be their greatest weapon. The next day at school, the tension in the air felt thicker than ever. The bullies were getting bolder, as if they knew their time was running out. Bradley and his group were already circling like sharks, waiting for their next chance to strike. It started in the cafeteria. Bradley, with his usual smug grin, made a snide comment about their hair, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "You two are just waiting for someone to come along and save you. But newsflash, no one's going to care about you, especially not with that. Look," he gestured to their clothes, their skin, their very being, everything that made them different. Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a look, but neither of them responded immediately. They'd trained their whole lives to stay calm, to stay composed, but inside, their hearts were pounding. This was the moment. But instead of anger, it was determination that filled them. Amara stood up first, slowly, her voice cold and controlled. "You've been talking for a long time, Bradley," she said, her tone calm, almost amused. "But we don't need anyone to save us. We're more than capable of taking care of ourselves, and trust me, you're about to learn that the hard way." Aaliyah followed suit, her eyes unwavering, her posture tense with the quiet intensity that only those who had been trained in martial arts could carry. "So you think you've won because you've bullied us, but this isn't over, not by a long shot." Bradley's grin faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. He wasn't used to anyone standing up to him, especially not the twins. He sneered and leaned in closer. "Is that a threat?" Amara's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Not a threat, a promise." As the crowd around them went silent, the twins knew that the days of letting Bradley and his friends push them around were coming to an end. The storm had finally arrived. The tension in Crestwood High was palpable the following morning. The twins knew that their words the day before hadn't gone unnoticed. It was only a matter of time before Bradley and his gang came up with some kind of retaliation. But Amara and Aaliyah were prepared. They knew that this wasn't just a battle of words anymore. It was something bigger, something that would require them to stand strong, not only in body, but in spirit. Their classes passed in a blur of indifference, the sounds of their teachers' voices echoing in the background, but neither Amara nor Aaliyah could concentrate. Their minds were elsewhere, preparing for what was coming next. Their classmates were watching, whispering behind their backs, some curious, others eager for the showdown they knew was about to unfold. It was after lunch that it happened. The hallway felt tighter than usual, as Amara and Aaliyah made their way to the restroom. The school's interior was alive with the sounds of students rushing from class to class, the usual hum of teenage life. But today, it was all heightened. For them, the atmosphere felt like it was holding its breath. As they neared the bathroom door, they heard the voices before they saw the faces. Bradley's voice was unmistakable, a low, taunting drawl that sent a shiver up Amara's spine. "So, the little freaks think they're tough now, huh?" Bradley laughed. "Let's see how tough they really are when we're done with them." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a brief, loaded glance. They didn't need to speak. They both understood what was about to unfold. They'd been pushed to their limit, and now they were ready to take control. As they entered the bathroom, the group of boys was already there, waiting. Bradley stood in front, his arms crossed, his friends flanking him on either side like wolves ready to close in on their prey. "Ah, look who it is." "The princesses," Bradley said, his smirk widening as he looked at Amara and Aaliyah. "What's the matter? Did your little talk yesterday get to your heads?" Aaliyah's jaw clenched, but Amara put a hand on her arm to steady her. She was calm, almost unnervingly so. There was no room for panic, no space for fear. This was the moment they had been training for. This was the moment they would finally stop pretending to be invisible. "No," Amara said, her voice steady, echoing in the small, tense space. "What got to our heads is the fact that we've been letting you walk all over us for too long. And that ends now." Bradley's expression twisted into a scowl, but before he could respond, one of his friends, a tall guy with dark hair named Jake, stepped forward. He was grinning, clearly enjoying the show, and his voice dripped with sarcasm. "Oh, so now you're going to fight us? That's cute," he snorted, looking over at the others, who were all clearly amused by the twins' defiance. "What, you think you can take us on? You're just a couple of girls." Aaliyah stepped up beside Amara, her stance firm. "Don't underestimate us. You've been running your mouths for too long, but we're done taking your crap." The boys laughed, but Amara didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, keeping her eyes locked on Bradley's. There was no fear in her gaze, just resolve. "You don't get it, do you?" she continued. "We're not the ones who need to prove ourselves to you. You're the ones who are trying to prove something. But guess what? Your time is up." Bradley's expression faltered for a second, the bravado in his eyes wavering just a bit. Amara could see that he wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by girls. Not by two black girls who, in his eyes, didn't belong in the same space he did. But there was something else in the air, something he didn't see coming, a quiet power that lingered between the twins, the kind of power that didn't need words to be felt. "You're playing with fire," Bradley said, his voice low as if trying to intimidate them. But there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now. He took a step forward, and Aaliyah mirrored him, not backing down. "Trust us," Amara said quietly, her voice calm but with an edge of steel. "You're the one who's going to get burned." In that moment, everything seemed to stand still. The group of boys was sizing them up, clearly unsure of how to respond to their newfound confidence. For the first time, they were the ones being cornered. And that realization hit Bradley like a ton of bricks. Amara's training kicked in. She knew exactly what to do. This wasn't about fighting. This was about making them understand that they had no more power over her or Aaliyah. "Do you really want to do this?" Aaliyah asked, her voice calm but carrying a warning that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Bradley stepped back, his smirk faltering. "This isn't over," he muttered, but before he could say anything more, one of his friends, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward, his eyes wide with nervousness. "Dude, maybe we should just go. It's not worth it." Amara and Aaliyah stood there unmoving, their presence undeniable. The rest of the group hesitated, the power dynamic shifting in real time. They had underestimated the twins, assuming that their silence in the face of bullying meant weakness. But now it was clear that the twins weren't afraid anymore, and that fearlessness made all the difference. Bradley's friends seemed to take the hint, murmuring among themselves before they started to back off one by one. Bradley lingered for a moment longer, still glaring, but even he could see that his hold over them was slipping. With a final sneer, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the bathroom, his gang trailing behind him. Amara and Aaliyah stood in the middle of the room, breathing slowly, but with a new sense of power radiating from them. The battle wasn't won with fists. It was won with presence, with confidence, and with the simple truth that they weren't going to take it anymore. "Let's go," Aaliyah said, her voice a mixture of relief and victory. Amara nodded, feeling something within her shift. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but today they had made their mark. They had shown everyone in that hallway what it meant to mess with the wrong twins, and it felt good. The following days were tense, but they felt different. The moment in the bathroom had set a new tone. It was as if the entire school was holding its breath, watching Amara and Aaliyah closely to see what would happen next. The twins didn't care much about the stares, the whispers, or the lingering glances that followed them wherever they went. They had taken their first stand, and the taste of victory, however small, was sweet, but they knew that the calm wouldn't last forever. Bradley and his friends weren't the type to back down so easily. Amara and Aaliyah had made their first move, but now they had to prepare for the consequences. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the twins sat in their room, the walls lined with posters of martial arts legends and motivational quotes from their father. Their father had always told them that strength came from within, but sometimes it also came from the world around you. It was the silence that could turn into a roar, the calm before a storm. "I can feel it," Aaliyah said, breaking the silence. She sat on her bed, her eyes narrowed as she stared at the floor, lost in thought. "I know they're going to come. After us. They won't just let it slide." Amara leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms above her head. "I know," she replied, "but we've already proven that we're not afraid anymore. They might try something, but it won't be easy." Aaliyah nodded slowly. "We've trained our whole lives for moments like this, but there's something I'm worried about. What if they come after us in a way we can't control?" The fear in Aaliyah's voice was palpable, but it was something Amara understood all too well. The twins were strong, yes, but there were still risks involved. Bradley and his group weren't just schoolyard bullies. They were a part of a larger system, a microcosm of the way people outside of school treated them. And though Amara and Aaliyah had grown strong, there was always the fear that things could escalate in a way they couldn't predict. "They'll try to mess with us in ways that we won't expect," Amara said, her voice steady. "But we need to keep control. We need to stay focused. We can't let them see us lose our footing." Aaliyah let out a breath and pulled her, knees up to her chest, hugging them tightly. "I just wish they could see us for who we really are, not just some target not just a joke to laugh at. They don't see us for who we are because they're too busy looking at the surface, Amara said, her eyes hardening. We're not going to let them define us. They don't get to control our story, we do. There was a long pause between the two of them as the weight of their words settled in. The storm was coming. They both knew it. But this time, they weren't going to back down. They weren't going to let fear control them. The next day at school, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Bradley and his group were nowhere to be seen. They'd either been laying low after the bathroom confrontation or plotting their next move. Either way, Amara and Aaliyah stayed on high alert. They knew better than to think that the problem would simply go away. During lunch, as they sat at their usual spot by the windows, Amara glanced over at the doors to the cafeteria, scanning for any sign of trouble. Aaliyah, sensing her sister's unease, turned her head as well, her eyes narrowing. "You're on edge," Aaliyah observed, picking at her food. "Do you think they're going to come for us today?" Amara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the crowd, her focus intense. "I think they might, but it won't be what we expect. Bradley's too proud to admit defeat. If anything, he'll try to embarrass us." Aaliyah chuckled softly. Let him try. Their conversation was interrupted when a shadow loomed over their table. Amara and Aaliyah both looked up to see Jake standing before them, an uncomfortable expression on his face. Behind him, Bradley and the others were just out of sight, likely observing from a distance. "Amara, Aaliyah," Jake said, his voice lacking the usual bravado. He shifted nervously from foot to foot, clearly unsure of how to approach them after their confrontation in the bathroom. We need to talk." Aaliyah's gaze remained sharp as she looked him over. "Talk about what?" "Look, I know what happened the other day, and I just wanted to say it wasn't right. I mean, we shouldn't have been messing with you guys like that. You don't deserve it." Amara raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. This wasn't the Jake they had known. The Jake they knew wouldn't have apologized. In fact, he would have probably laughed it off. "What's the catch?" Amara asked, her voice cool. Jake winced but stood his ground. "No catch. I'm just trying to get ahead of it before things get worse. I don't know what Bradley's planning, but he's not taking this well. He's pissed." Aaliyah exchanged a look with Amara. "We can handle ourselves." "I know," Jake said quickly, his hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. "But, look, if you're going to deal with him, be careful. He's not going to let this go, not without trying to make it worse." Amara didn't respond immediately, letting the information sink in. She could sense the tension in Jake. He was nervous, scared even. And that was new. "Thanks for the warning," Aaliyah said, her voice steady but appreciative. "But we've got this." As Jake turned and walked away, Amara turned her attention back to her sister. "It's not just us anymore, it's bigger than that." Aaliyah nodded, her eyes hardening. "Let them come, we're ready." The rest of the day passed in a haze of suspicion and wariness. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that their every move was being analyzed, waiting for them to slip. It was only a matter of time before Bradley and his friends made their next move. But the twins weren't afraid of the storm. They were ready to weather it, no matter how strong it was. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of school, they were already making plans for the next step. They wouldn't wait for Bradley to act first. This time they'd be the ones to make the move, but no one, especially Bradley, would be prepared for what was coming. Amara and Aaliyah walked side by side as they made their way out of the school gates, the late afternoon sun, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. Their minds were racing, each sister processing the tension of the day in her own way. The warning from Jake had left a mark, but it also fueled their determination. They knew that the storm was coming, but they also knew they couldn't let fear control them. They would fight back, not with just their fists, but with everything they had. When they reached home, their father was already there, sitting at the kitchen table. His strong, steady presence a constant source of strength. His face was lined with age and wisdom, but his eyes, sharp and observant, never missed a thing. He knew something had shifted in the twins. He could feel the change in the air. "Training tonight?" he asked, looking up from his book, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something deeper. He could tell his daughters were facing a new challenge, one that would require more than just their usual techniques. Amara exchanged a glance with Aaliyah. They didn't need to speak. She knew what Aaliyah was thinking. This was their moment to push further, to take their skills to the next level. If Bradley and his crew were going to come at them, they would be ready. They wouldn't just react. They would anticipate. "Yeah," Amara replied, her voice steady but with a quiet fire behind it. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next. We can't afford to be caught off guard." Their father nodded, closing his book and standing up from the table. "I've always told you two that strength isn't just about how hard you hit. It's about control, focus, and knowing when to move. Tonight we'll push you both further, not just physically but mentally. You need to be ready for whatever comes your way." Aaliyah nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. Training with their father was always more than just the physicality of martial arts. It was about discipline, control, and the power of the mind. They had spent their whole lives learning these principles, but now it felt like they were truly about to put them into action. Later that night, in the spacious garage that had been converted into their training area, Amara and Aaliyah stood, facing each other, sweat already beginning to bead on their foreheads. Their father stood off to the side, his arms crossed, observing closely. "Remember, focus," their father said, his voice low but firm. "Everything starts with your mind. You've already proven that you have the strength, now you need to outthink them." Amara and Aaliyah nodded, their expressions hardening. They had been training together for years, perfecting their moves, each one as natural as breathing. But tonight they were learning something new: patience. The ability to strike when the moment was right, not when the enemy expected it. Their father called out the first drill, a series of evasive maneuvers mixed with counters and strikes. They were fast, fluid, and precise. The sounds of their movements echoed in the garage, the thud of punches landing against pads and the swish of feet moving across the floor filling the space. But there was a rhythm to it, a tempo that they followed without thinking. After an hour, their father called them to a stop, his face serious. "Good. Now I want you to use what you've learned not just in your body but in your mind. Think about what you're doing, why you're doing it. Don't just react. Let the situation unfold and then make your move." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged glances. This was the real test, controlling the impulse to react immediately and learning to be patient, calculating. "Let's go again," Aaliyah said, her voice steady, determination lighting her eyes. They dove back into the routine, each move sharper than the last, their minds working in sync with their bodies. They could feel the shift. This wasn't just about fighting. It was about strategy. It was about knowing when to push and when to pull back. And they knew, deep down, that when the time came, they wouldn't just fight, they would win. 2. Next day at school, the tension that had been building finally reached its peak. Bradley and his crew were back in full force. Word had spread quickly about the twins' defiance, and now everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. During the first period, Amara sat in the back of the classroom, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of her desk as she stared out the window. She could feel it in the air. Something was about to happen, and she wasn't wrong. As the bell rang for the next class, a commotion erupted outside the classroom door. The sound of voices raised in anger filtered into the room, and the teacher quickly stood up, his face growing tense. "Stay here," he instructed, stepping toward the door. "I'll see what's going on." Amara exchanged a glance with Aaliyah. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. They both stood up, ready. This was it. They weren't going to wait for Bradley and his crew to make the first move anymore. They were going to take control of the situation, just like they had trained. The twins walked toward the door side by side, their steps synchronized. The hallway was a chaos of voices, but at the center of it all, standing in a circle, was Bradley. His face was twisted into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to finish what he had started. Well, if it isn't the freaks," Bradley sneered as the twins approached. His friends stood behind him looking uneasy, but Bradley was determined to keep the upper hand. "You think you can just walk around here like nothing happened?" Amara's eyes locked with his. There was no fear in her gaze, only quiet confidence. "We've had enough, Bradley," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made everyone pause. "You've been messing with us for far too long. This ends now." Bradley scoffed, taking a step forward. "What are you going to do about it?" Amara didn't respond immediately. She knew that this wasn't the time for words, it was time for action. Aaliyah shifted beside her, her muscles tensing as if she were preparing to spring into motion at any moment. Just as Bradley moved closer, Amara spoke again, her voice low but filled with authority. "You want to test us? Then you better be ready for what comes next. We're not who you think we are." Before anyone could react, the twins sprang into action, faster, stronger, more controlled than they had ever been before. They moved in. Perfect sync, their strikes and movements deliberate, efficient. The surprise was evident on Bradley's face as he tried to back away, but it was too late. They had already made their point. The bell rang loudly, signaling the end of the school day, but the tension in the air was still palpable. Amara and Aaliyah stood in the hallway, their faces calm but their eyes alert. They could feel the heat of the moment lingering in the air. The confrontation with Bradley and his gang had just escalated, and even though they had made their point, they knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the crowd around them slowly dispersed, students murmuring about the twins' sudden show of force, the twins exchanged a look. Their fight wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. They had stood up to their tormentors in a way that demanded respect, but they knew Bradley and his crew would try to come back stronger. Aaliyah cracked her knuckles, a subtle sign that she was ready for whatever would come next. "That wasn't enough to make them stop," she said quietly, "but it sure as hell made them think twice." Amara nodded in agreement, scanning the hallway for any signs of trouble. "We've made them notice us, but it's only the beginning. They're going to come at us harder now, and we need to be prepared." The sisters didn't need to discuss it further. They knew what they had to do. Their next move would need to be bigger, smarter, and more strategic. They couldn't just keep reacting. They had to control the fight, not just physically, but psychologically. Later that night, after dinner, the twins went to their training area in the garage. Their father had already prepared the space, setting up a series of new drills meant to push them beyond their limits. He could see the shift in them, the quiet determination that had replaced the uncertainty they'd had in the beginning. "What's on your mind?" their father asked as they stood together warming up. He was always perceptive, reading them in a way that made it feel as though he could see their thoughts. Amara looked up, her eyes steady. "We're not just fighting to defend ourselves anymore. We're fighting to control the situation. We have to be better, faster, and smarter. Bradley and his friends, they won't give up. They'll keep coming at us until we break. But we won't." Their father's face softened into a proud smile, though his eyes never left them. "That's the right mindset. But remember, it's not always about who's stronger. It's about who's patient enough to win. The fight isn't just physical, it's mental. If you can control your emotions, control your thoughts, then the fight is already half won." Aaliyah nodded, her face set in determination. "We've trained for years to be fighters, but now it's time to fight smarter. We need to understand their next move before they even make it." Their father stepped forward, handing them each a set of focus pads. "Tonight, I'll push you both harder than ever before. I want you to feel what it's like to be completely in control, to anticipate your opponent's next move." The next several hours were spent in intense focus. Their father led them through complex maneuvers, pushing them to react faster and think clearer. Amara and Aaliyah pushed their bodies to the limit, feeling their muscles burn and their hearts race, but they never faltered. The twins knew that this would be their edge, the ability to stay calm and control the fight, no matter how fast it came at them. As they wrapped up their training, their father gave them a moment to catch their breath. "You've learned a lot tonight, but remember, the real fight isn't about the kicks or punches. It's about staying calm when everything around you is chaos." The twins stood there panting, their bodies sore but their minds sharper than ever. "We're ready," Aaliyah said, her voice steady and full of conviction. "We won't let them win," Amara's gaze hardened. "We'll end this on our terms." The following day at school, the twins kept their eyes open for any signs of retaliation. The halls buzzed with rumors of what had happened between them and Bradley's group, and whispers followed them wherever they went. But neither of them paid it any mind. They were too focused on the bigger picture. During lunch, the usual group, of friends who'd always sided with Bradley were nowhere to be found. The cafeteria was quieter than usual, and the tension was thick, but Amara and Aaliyah weren't about to let their guard down. They both knew that the calm before the storm was only temporary. Suddenly, the doors to the cafeteria burst open, and Bradley stormed in, his face twisted in anger. Behind him, his friends, Jake and the others, followed, their faces betraying uncertainty. Bradley's eyes locked onto the twins as he marched toward them, every step dripping with hostility. "I told you this wasn't over," Bradley spat, stopping just a few feet away from them. His voice was full of venom, and his eyes were filled with the rage of someone who had been humiliated. Amara and Aaliyah stood their ground, their expressions calm. They didn't flinch. They knew what was coming, and they weren't afraid. "You didn't think you could just embarrass me and get away with it, did you?" Bradley sneered, his fists clenching at his sides. Amara stepped forward, her voice cool and controlled. "You've been embarrassing yourself for months, Bradley. It's time for you to realize that we're not the ones you can push around." Bradley's face twisted in fury. "You think you've won? You think you've proven something? This ends now." Before he could take another step, Aaliyah's voice rang out sharply, cutting through the tension in the air. "No, Bradley. It ends when we say it does." For a moment, everything went still. The entire cafeteria watched, waiting to see who would make the first move. Bradley's anger was palpable, but so was the calm confidence in the twins. They were ready, not just for this fight, but for everything that would come after it. In that moment, it became clear. Bradley wasn't the one in control anymore. Amara and Aaliyah had flipped the script, and the fight was just beginning. The room was suffused with an eerie silence as Bradley glared at the twins, his fists trembling with barely contained rage. The entire cafeteria had stopped moving, students frozen in their seats, waiting for the next move. The air was thick with anticipation. Every whisper, every eye was focused on the confrontation. Amara and Aaliyah stood side by side, their posture calm and controlled, though inside they were both on high alert. They had spent years training for moments like this, moments where everything could change with a single strike. But this time they were not just defending themselves. This time they were going to end it. Bradley's voice was low, laced with venom. "You're going to regret this. I'm not just going to let you walk away from this. No one disrespects me like that and gets away with it." Aaliyah stepped forward, her calm demeanor hiding the fury beneath. "You've been picking on us for months, Bradley. We don't have to take it anymore, and frankly, we're done with the games." Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable edge to it. She was ready, and her sister was right there with her. Bradley took a step closer, trying to close the distance between them, his eyes burning with hatred. He was itching for a fight, his posture aggressive, but neither of the twins budged. They had been preparing for this exact moment. Before Bradley could make the first move, Amara's eyes flashed with a hint of something cold, something sharp. "You wanted a fight, Bradley. Well, you've got one. But we're not going to play by your rules." She motioned slightly to Aaliyah, who nodded in response, her body shifting into a more defensive stance. The tension was unbearable. Seconds dragged on as Bradley tried to read their movements, but the twins were in sync, calm, patient, waiting for him to make his move. He didn't know it yet, but the first strike would come from them, and it would be swift. With a roar, Bradley lunged at Amara, throwing a wild punch aimed at her face. The cafeteria erupted with gasps and muttered comments, but the twins didn't flinch. They had seen this before. In one fluid motion, Amara sidestepped, using her opponent's momentum against him. She ducked low, feeling the rush of air as Bradley's fist swiped just inches from her face. With a swift pivot, she landed a hard, controlled blow to his side, just enough to knock the wind out of him and send him stumbling backward. The crowd gasped, and Bradley's friends took a step back, clearly unsure of how to react. They had never seen Amara and Aaliyah fight like this before. They weren't just defending themselves, they were in complete control. Bradley, now gasping for air, quickly regained his balance, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He clenched his jaw, trying to shake off the surprise of the hit. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end, and his pride was taking a hit just as much as his body. "You think that was enough?" Bradley spat, his voice breaking with rage. He swung his fist again, but this time Aaliyah was ready. With precision, she blocked his punch with one arm and used her free hand to deliver a series of quick strikes to his chest. She moved like a shadow, efficient and precise. Each blow was calculated, her body a blur of motion as she executed a textbook series of defensive and offensive moves. She didn't give him a moment to recover. Bradley staggered backward, unable to catch his breath. His body was starting to ache from the blows, and his anger was beginning to give way to frustration. "You can't keep doing this," Bradley growled, wiping blood from his lip. His eyes darted around, realizing his friends were no longer backing him up. They were standing at the sidelines, unsure of how to react. His own pride and reputation were crumbling in front of him, and it was clear he wasn't prepared for what had just unfolded. Amara and Aaliyah stood tall, each breathing evenly, their eyes never leaving Bradley. The fight wasn't just about physical strength, it was about dominance, strategy, and knowing how to take control of the situation. "Bradley," Amara said, her voice firm but calm, "this could have ended months ago, but you pushed us, and now it ends on our terms." Her words were sharp, cutting through the tension. Bradley's fists clenched, his chest heaving as he tried to muster the strength to keep going. But deep down, he knew the twins had already won. This wasn't a fight he could win, not without making a fool of himself, not without going down a path he wasn't willing to follow. He shot them one last venomous look before turning and storming out of the cafeteria, his friends trailing behind him, looking more like cowards than anything else. As soon as the door slammed behind them, the cafeteria erupted into a flurry of chatter. Students looked at Amara and Aaliyah with a mix of awe and fear. Some whispered, "Congratulations," while others remained silent, clearly in shock at how easily the twins had handled the situation. Aaliyah gave a small, satisfied smile, but she didn't let her guard down. "That wasn't the last of it," she said quietly to Amara. "I know," Amara replied, her expression thoughtful, "but it's the last time he'll think he can walk all over us." That evening, as they sat down for dinner, their father studied them closely, noticing the glint of something new in their eyes, a hard-won confidence. He said nothing at first, just watched them eat, knowing that the confrontation at school was only a small part of what was to come. The real battle had only just begun. "You did well today," their father finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "But remember, control is everything, not just in the ring, but in life. That fight wasn't about proving your strength. It was about showing them who's in control." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a look, their faces serious but filled with quiet pride. "We know," Amara said softly, "and we're ready for whatever happens next." Later that night, as the twins prepared for another round of training, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the path they were on. What had started as a series of taunts and bullying had now become something much more dangerous. But the twins were no longer the victims. They were warriors, fighters in the truest sense of the word, and Bradley and his crew had just learned that the black twins were not to be underestimated. The next few days passed in a tense, quiet rhythm. The aftermath of the confrontation in the cafeteria still hung in the air, but there was something different now. The students who had once whispered behind Amara and Aaliyah's backs were now avoiding them, uncertain of how to approach the twins. It was clear that something had changed. Despite the temporary silence, the twins could feel the storm brewing. By Thursday, it was impossible to ignore any longer. The whispers had turned to rumors, and the rumors had turned into outright challenges. Bradley hadn't forgotten about the humiliation in the cafeteria. In fact, it had only fueled his anger, making him more determined than ever to break the sea. Twins! The first sign came when Amara was walking to her locker between classes. She rounded the corner and almost collided with a group of students who were clearly waiting for her. "Watch where you're going," one of them muttered. A tall kid named Jake, who was Bradley's closest friend. Amara stopped, her gaze sharp. "Is there a problem, Jake?" Jake sneered, his eyes darting nervously over to the other kids standing behind him. "Just wanted to make sure you remembered where you stand. You think you're tough now, huh?" he said, his voice rising. "That wasn't enough. Bradley's coming for you, and this time you won't get away." Amara didn't blink. Tell Bradley to bring it. We're not scared of him. Jake let out a forced laugh. You'll be sorry. You can't hide from him forever. With that, he pushed past her, walking quickly down the hall with the rest of his group in tow. Amara's heart beat steadily in her chest, but she didn't let the fear show. She turned back to her locker and slammed it shut, deep in thought. After school that day, Amara and Aaliyah met in the gym, ready for their evening training session. But it wasn't the usual training. Today, there was an edge to the air. They could both feel it. You heard what Jake said? Aaliyah asked, her voice low but filled with conviction. Amara nodded. Bradley's not done. This time it's not just about him. He's going to rally the whole school behind him. He wants to break us. Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. Let him try. We're not backing down. The twins stood in front of the mirrors, sizing each other up. Their movements were fluid as they began to go through their warm-ups, stretching and practicing their stances. They both knew they were about to face the toughest challenge they had ever encountered, not just in terms of strength, but mentally. Bradley was no longer just a bully. He had become a symbol of everything they had fought against in their lives. Their father had always told them that the true battle was one of the mind. They had learned the moves, the techniques, the discipline, but now they needed to tap into something deeper, the strength to keep going when everything seemed stacked against them. This isn't just about fighting, Amara said quietly, catching Aaliyah's eye in the mirror. It's about sending a message, Aaliyah nodded, and we're going to make sure they get it. The next day, the message was loud and clear. During lunch, as Amara and Aaliyah sat together, Bradley and his gang entered the cafeteria, but this time they were different. They were more organized, more purposeful. Bradley's eyes immediately found the twins, a sinister smile spreading across his face. He didn't wait for a confrontation. He walked straight up to them, flanked by Jake and another member of his crew, a big kid named Max. Enough of this, Bradley growled, his voice filled with rage and an almost desperate need to prove something. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Now it's time to pay the price. Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a glance. Neither of them moved. They had prepared for this. They knew what was coming. Bradley smirked and gestured to Max, who stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. You're going to regret crossing us. Aaliyah stood up first, her posture calm but her eyes focused. You think this is just about you? She asked. You're wrong. This isn't just about some petty revenge. This is about respect. And we've already earned it. Max stepped forward aggressively, trying to grab Aaliyah by the arm. But before his hand could make contact, Aaliyah twisted out of his grip with a fluid motion, sending him stumbling forward. The entire cafeteria went silent. Bradley's face twisted in disbelief. What the hell? Amara's voice was cool, almost casual as she spoke. If you want to fight, Bradley, we'll fight. But you should know something. She paused, locking eyes with him. You'll lose, and not just today. Bradley's fists clenched, his face flushed with embarrassment. You think you've won. You think you can just walk away from this. You've got no idea what you've started. The challenge in Bradley's voice was clear, but it was laced with something else. Fear. He wasn't just mad, he was scared. And that fear was spreading to his gang, who were now standing at a distance, uncertain of how to proceed. They had witnessed the twins' skills firsthand, and it was clear they weren't dealing with the same people anymore. Enough of the talk, Aaliyah said, her voice low and dangerous. If you want to do something, do it, but we won't. Back down. The tension in the room was palpable. Bradley's eyes flicked from Aaliyah to Amara and back again. He was torn, his pride and anger telling him to strike, but his instincts warning him that he was about to make a huge mistake. Don't say we didn't warn you, Bradley hissed through gritted teeth before turning and storming off with his group. They left the cafeteria quickly, the group looking back with reluctant glances at the twins. The moment they left, the tension broke, and the cafeteria returned to its usual noise. But the twins knew that this wasn't the end. Bradley had just gone to Plan B, and they would have to be ready for whatever came next. That night, they trained harder than ever. Their father pushed them to their limits, forcing them to sharpen their reactions and control their emotions in the heat of the moment. They knew they would need every ounce of strength, both physical and mental, when the final confrontation came. "I'm proud of you both," their father said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "But don't forget, this fight is as much about strategy as it is about strength. Bradley's desperate now, and that makes him dangerous." Amara and Aaliyah nodded, their bodies exhausted, but their resolve firm. "We're ready," Amara said. "We're going to end this on our terms." The storm was coming, but the twins weren't afraid. They had a secret weapon, a deadly one, and they were about to unleash it. The next few days felt like an endless waiting game. Every glance, from across the school hallways, every whisper in the classrooms seemed to vibrate with the tension building up between the twins and Bradley. They could feel it, an undeniable force pressing down on them from all sides. The school was waiting for the showdown, and the twins were ready. But Bradley, he was a wild card, unpredictable and dangerous. It was Friday afternoon when the challenge came, though not in the way they expected. Amara and Aaliyah were in their last class of the day, a quiet English seminar, when the principal's voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention, students. There has been an incident in the school parking lot. We ask that all students remain in their classrooms until further notice. Please remain calm, thank you." The message was short and cryptic, but the twins exchanged a glance. They both knew what this meant. Bradley was escalating things, and he wasn't going to back down this time. Later that afternoon, after school let out, Amara and Aaliyah made their way toward the parking lot, their eyes scanning the surroundings as they moved. The tension was palpable in the air. The typical chatter of students was replaced by an unsettling quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath in anticipation of something terrible happening. When they reached the lot, the scene was exactly what they feared. A crowd had gathered in front of their car. Bradley and his crew were there, standing in a tight circle, looking like they were ready to cause trouble. Bradley was at the center, his face twisted in a grimace of frustration. He noticed the twins the moment they stepped into view, and without a second's hesitation he pointed at them. "There you are. We're going to finish this today." The crowd parted to give them room, and Amara and Aaliyah walked toward the center of the tension, their faces unreadable. The only sound was the faint breeze and the murmurs of students watching, all eagerly waiting to see how this was going to play out. Bradley stepped forward, the animosity in his gaze palpable. "You think you've beaten me," he sneered. "That's adorable, but you're about to learn how this really works." His eyes darted around to his crew. "Get them." The air crackled with tension as Max and Jake lunged toward the twins. But Amara and Aaliyah were already in motion, their movements swift and synchronized. Max went for Aaliyah first, but she was faster. She sidestepped his clumsy lunge, using his momentum against him. With a swift turn, she grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, using his own weight to push him down to the ground. The crowd gasped, some of them pulling back in surprise, others backing away in fear. Jake, however, was more careful. He circled Amara, trying to find an opening. He was quick, but Amara was quicker. She feigned a misstep to draw him in, and when he took the bait, she spun on her heel and delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs. Jake winced in pain, stumbling backward. Bradley's eyes widened as his friends went down one by one. He hadn't expected this. His fists clenched, and without thinking, he rushed toward Amara, but Amara saw him coming long before he got close. Her eyes locked with his, and in that split second she knew what was going to happen. She didn't back down, though. She stood her ground. Bradley threw a punch, a wild swing meant to land a knockout blow, but Amara was too fast. She ducked under his arm and swept his legs out from beneath him, sending him crashing to the pavement. The entire parking lot was dead silent. No one moved. Even Bradley's crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Bradley slowly pushed himself up from the ground, his face a mask of embarrassment and rage. His pride was shattered. He had just been outclassed in front of everyone. This wasn't just about fighting anymore. It was about control. It was about dominance. "You've got some moves," Bradley spat, glaring at the twins. "But this isn't over." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed as she watched him struggle to regain his composure. "It is over," she said calmly. "You've already lost. It's just a matter of you accepting it." Bradley's face twisted in anger, but there was something else behind his eyes now. Fear. He realized deep down that he couldn't win. He was no match for them, not in the ring, not on the streets, not in life. But his pride was still there, and he was unwilling to admit defeat. He turned on his heel, signaling his friends to follow him. "This isn't the last time you'll hear from me," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "You haven't seen the last of Bradley." As he walked away, his gang hesitated for a moment before reluctantly following him. The students who had gathered slowly began to disperse, some murmuring among themselves, others looking at the twins with new eyes. Amara and Aaliyah stood together, their bodies relaxed, but their minds focused. They had fought their battle and won, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening they returned home, the weight of the day settling over them. Their father, sitting at the dinner table, studied them closely. "You did well today," he said, his voice steady but proud. "But don't get complacent. There's always more to the story. Bradley won't stop trying to bring you down. The key is to keep moving forward." The twins exchanged a look. They knew their father was right. They had faced their biggest challenge yet and won, but they couldn't let their guard down. This was only the beginning. As they sat down to eat, Amara and Aaliyah were quiet for a moment, reflecting on the lessons they had learned over the past few weeks. They had come a long way since the bullying began, and though the fight wasn't over, they had learned something vital. No one could break them. Not now, not ever. The twins had a deadly secret, one they had been keeping hidden for years. But the truth was, they didn't need it to fight their battles. They had something even more powerful: each other. The days following the showdown in the parking lot felt surreal. Bradley and his crew hadn't made another move. The school seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, as if everyone was waiting for the storm to pass. But Amara and Aaliyah knew better. They knew Bradley wasn't the type to give up so easily. But for now, there was a temporary peace. The twins continued their daily routines. They trained harder than ever, knowing that this moment of calm wouldn't last forever. Their father kept reminding them to stay sharp and be ready for whatever came next. The fight had moved beyond just physical strength. Now it was about survival, control, and the kind of mental strength only true warriors possessed. One afternoon, as the school bell rang to signal the end of the day, the twins found themselves walking toward their car, their steps in sync as always. They noticed the students. Around them seemed to be watching them more than usual, some even whispering as they passed by. Amara and Aaliyah didn't let it faze them. They'd been through worse, but as they approached their car, something felt off. There, parked just a few spaces away, was a sleek black car they didn't recognize. The windows were tinted, and it seemed out of place. As the twins walked closer, the car door opened, and a tall, muscular figure stepped out. The man's face was obscured by the shadow of his cap, but there was something unmistakable about his presence. He exuded a calm, calculated menace. Aaliyah instinctively placed her hand on Amara's arm, a silent warning. The man didn't move. Immediately just watched them with piercing eyes, waiting for them to react. Finally he spoke. His voice was deep and smooth, with an edge of authority that sent a chill down their spines. "You're the twins, right? Amara and Aaliyah?" The twins didn't respond immediately. Instead, they stood tall, their eyes fixed on the man. They could tell this wasn't just some random person. Whoever he was, he had come for them, and he wasn't here for small talk. "Yes, that's us," Amara said, her voice calm but firm. The man nodded slowly, as if confirming something. "Bradley has a message for you," he said, stepping closer but keeping his distance. "He wants you to know that his fight is far from over. He's going to make sure you regret crossing him." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a glance. This wasn't just a warning. This was an escalation. Bradley had sent someone to intimidate them, and this man was no ordinary thug. He was too calm, too controlled. There was something deliberate about his presence. "We're not afraid of him," Aaliyah said quietly, but her voice held a layer of steel. "We've already shown him what we're capable of." The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a cold, almost amused grin. "That's cute, but Bradley's not the one you should be worried about. He's just a puppet. The real power is behind the scenes." He paused, letting the words sink in. I'm here to tell you that the game has changed." With that, the man turned on his heel and got back into his car, driving off without another word. The twins stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. "I don't like this," Amara said, her voice tight with unease. Aaliyah nodded. "Neither do I. Bradley might be the one in the spotlight, but it's clear now that there's someone else pulling the strings. We need to find out who, and fast." The twins spent the next few days researching, trying to piece together the mystery behind the shadowy figure and his connection to Bradley. They asked around the school, but no one knew much. The man who had spoken to them seemed to be a professional, someone who didn't draw attention to himself, and his connection to Bradley was unclear. It wasn't until they caught wind of a rumor that things started to click into place. One of the students, an older kid named Tyler, who worked part-time at a local gym, had seen the man a few weeks ago. According to Tyler, the man wasn't just some random person. He was part of a much larger operation. He'd been seen talking to some of the school's most powerful figures, teachers, coaches, even local business owners. It was clear that Bradley was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. The twins knew they needed to be cautious. Whoever this man was, they couldn't underestimate him. He wasn't a typical bully. He was someone who understood how to play. The game and his resources were clearly vast. "We need to go to the source," Amara said one evening, as they sat together in their room, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. "Bradley is just the tip of the iceberg. There's something much bigger going on here," Aaliyah agreed. "We'll confront him directly, but we need to be smart. We can't go in blind." The twins had always trusted each other implicitly, and now, more than ever, that trust would be their greatest strength. They knew they were up against more than just a schoolyard bully. They were facing a network of power, and it was time to take the fight to them. The next day, the twins decided to follow their instincts and go straight to the source. They spent the entire afternoon shadowing Bradley, watching his every move. They weren't sure what they were looking for, but they knew they needed to find out more about this mysterious figure who had been working behind the scenes. As the sun began to set, Bradley finally made his move. He walked to the back of the school, where a black van was parked near the woods. The van's door slid open, and the twins watched from a distance as Bradley stepped inside, disappearing into the shadows. "That's it," Amara said, her voice tense. "We follow him." Aaliyah didn't hesitate. She nodded sharply. "Let's go." They moved quickly, silently, blending into the shadows as they made their way toward the van. Their training had prepared them for moments like this, when it was time to act quickly, to take control of a situation before it spiraled out of their hands. The twins were close now, just a few steps away from the van, when they heard voices coming from inside. They couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Bradley was talking to someone, and it wasn't friendly. Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a look. This was it. They were about to uncover the truth behind the power that had been manipulating Bradley, and they were going to take control. The air was thick with tension as the twins crouched behind a row of bushes, only a few feet away from the black van. Their hearts beat in sync, steady and resolute as they waited for the right moment. Every sound, every shadow seemed amplified in the heavy silence that surrounded them. Amara's eyes were locked on the van's rear door, her muscles coiled like a spring, ready for action at the slightest movement. Aaliyah was beside her, her hand lightly brushing the side of Amara's, a silent gesture of reassurance. The twins had faced their fair share of danger before, but something about this felt different, more dangerous, more sinister. From the van, muffled voices could be heard. One was unmistakably Bradley's, his tone sharp, filled with frustration. The other voice, however, was calm, controlled. A man's voice, smooth like silk, but carrying an undeniable authority. "Bradley," the man said, his voice low and almost soothing, "you need to let go of the personal animosities. This is bigger than your little grudge. You were chosen for this, and you're going to see it through." Bradley's response was almost a growl. "I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask for any of this. I just want to make them pay." There was a brief pause, and then the man's voice returned, colder now, but still controlled. "You don't get to choose how this goes. Your emotions are clouding your judgment. This isn't about you, Bradley. This is about the bigger picture. Aaliyah and Amara exchanged a glance. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just manipulating Bradley, he was controlling him, using his anger and resentment as a tool in a much larger game. "We have to get closer," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to find out who he is." Aaliyah nodded, her mind racing with questions. They'd uncovered enough to know that this wasn't just a simple school rivalry. There was a network at play, one that was pulling Bradley's strings, using him as a pawn in something far more dangerous. The twins carefully made their way closer to the van, moving silently, their senses heightened. They ducked behind a stack of crates near the back of the building, just a few feet from the open door of the van. Through the small gap, they could see Bradley standing with the man, his body tense, his face twisted with anger. But the man remained calm, almost eerily so. Suddenly, Bradley turned to face the van's interior, his eyes scanning the darkness within. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she realized they were dangerously close to being discovered. The man, however, seemed to sense this and motioned for Bradley to keep talking. "Look," Bradley said, his frustration still evident, "I've been doing your dirty work. I want answers. I want to know what's really going on here." The man chuckled, a sound that sent chills down the twins' spines. "Patience, Bradley. All in good time. But you're not ready for the full picture. You still think small. Think high school drama, personal vendettas. The real game is about power, influence, control. It's about making sure we stay ahead." Amara's blood ran cold. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just about the school or a fight over pride. It was about something much larger, a covert operation, an underground network that had infiltrated every corner of society. And Bradley was just a tool they were using to execute their plan. "What about them?" Bradley asked, his voice laced. "With venom." "The twins. They're the problem. They've been getting in my way. What do we do about them?" The man's response was chilling in its calmness. "Leave them for now. They'll make their move, and when they do, we'll be ready. You've already pushed them too far, but they won't fight back unless they feel cornered, and that's when we'll strike." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a worried look. The man was talking about them like they were just another obstacle to overcome, like they were pawns in a game they didn't fully understand. "I'm not backing." "Down," Bradley growled. "I'll make them regret it." The man finally stepped out of the van, his silhouette looming large in the evening twilight. He turned to Bradley with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're not in control of this, Bradley. You never were. But if you keep doing your part, we might just let you think you are." He stepped toward the back of the van, and for the first time, the twins got a glimpse of his face. It was a cold, calculating expression, sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. Amara's blood froze. She knew that face. It was Mr. Griffin, the assistant coach of the football team. Later that night, as they sat in their room, the twins couldn't shake the images of what they'd just witnessed. Mr. Griffin was the last person they ever would have suspected to be involved in something like this. But now it all made sense. His position in the school, his ability to influence so many people, his access to the inner workings of the school, it all lined up. "We've been blind," Aaliyah said quietly, the weight of realization hitting her. "It was never just Bradley. It was always bigger than him. He's just a part of something much more dangerous." Amara nodded. "We need to bring this to the light, but we can't do it alone. If we expose Mr. Griffin, we need to make sure we have proof. We need allies, and most of all, we need to be ready for anything." The next few days were a blur of frantic planning as the twins worked together to piece together the puzzle. They began gathering evidence, anything they could use to expose Mr. Griffin's involvement in this underground network. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized how deep the corruption ran. The pieces were falling into place, but they knew they couldn't go public just yet. If they exposed too much too soon, it could blow up in their faces. They needed to move carefully, one step at a time. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, their father joined them. He didn't ask what they were working on, but they knew he could see the worry in their eyes. "Whatever you're doing," he said softly, "you need to be sure you're not just fighting for yourselves anymore. You're fighting for something much bigger, And when you make your move, there's no going back. Amara and Aaliyah nodded. They weren't backing down, not now, not ever. The storm was coming, and they were ready. The next few days were spent in a whirlwind of research and reconnaissance. Amara and Aaliyah had dug deeper into the web of deceit that Mr. Griffin was weaving through the school, and the more they uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. Their lives were no longer just about standing up to a bully. They had stumbled upon a network, a system of control and manipulation that reached far beyond the walls of their high school. The twins spent hours online, researching underground operations, black market deals, and anything that might give them insight into what Mr. Griffin and his associates were up to. What started as a schoolyard fight had transformed into a battle against a shadowy cabal, one that they could barely begin to comprehend. But they couldn't back down now, not when they were this close to unraveling the truth. One evening, as they sat together in their room, the twins sorted through pages of notes and printouts. Aaliyah was flipping through a folder of names they'd compiled, while Amara typed on her laptop, scanning through a series of encrypted emails they'd managed to access with some help from an old friend who was a tech whiz. So far, everything points back to Griffin, Aaliyah said, shaking her head in disbelief. But there's something off about it. It's not just him. There's someone else, someone higher up who's pulling the strings. Amara nodded, her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the data. I agree. Griffin's just the front. He's the face we see, but there's a shadow behind him. We need to figure out who that is. Just as she was about to click on another link, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and saw a message from Tyler, the student who had given them the first clue about Mr. Griffin's involvement. You need to be careful. I overheard something today. Griffin's planning something big. He's bringing in more muscle, and it's not just for the school. They're making moves. I think they've targeted you guys. Watch your backs. Amara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She showed the message to Aaliyah, and they both knew what it meant. The enemy was closing in. The danger wasn't just in their school anymore, it was personal. It was life or death. We can't wait any longer, Aaliyah said, determination settling into her voice. We need to expose Griffin now before he makes his move. But we have to be smart. If he's really connected to something bigger, there's no telling what he'll do if he feels cornered. Amara agreed. We need proof, something concrete we can use. We go after the people backing him, his connections, but we have to move fast. If we give him enough time, he'll cover his tracks. The twins knew they had to take risks, but they were no strangers to danger. Their training had prepared them for moments like this, the moments where everything was on the line and there was no room for hesitation. That night, they made their plan. First, they needed to confront Griffin. Directly. They couldn't afford to wait for him to make another move. They needed to be proactive. And the best way to do that was to break into his office and find any evidence they could use against him. Griffin had an office on campus, hidden away from the prying eyes of students and staff. It was in the back of the school gymnasium, past the locker rooms and storage closets. No one ever seemed to know exactly what was inside, but the twins had a gut feeling that it was the key to unraveling the mystery. They had to get in. The following evening, just after school ended and most students had gone home, Amara and Aaliyah made their way to the gym. They had already scoped out the building, making sure the hallways were empty and that the security cameras were well placed, but not too focused on the gym's rear entrance. The twins moved silently, their shoes barely making a sound as they walked down the long hallway toward the gym. Aaliyah had the set of keys they'd borrowed from a janitor earlier that day, and she expertly unlocked the back door. It creaked open with barely a whisper, and they slipped inside. They crept through the gym, using the shadows to conceal their movements until they reached the small office at the far end. The door was locked, but Amara had anticipated this. With the precision of a skilled martial artist, she applied a simple technique that allowed her to pick the lock in seconds. The door swung open. Inside, the office was small but meticulously organized. Files were stacked neatly on a desk, and a large filing cabinet stood against one wall. The twins didn't waste any time. They went straight to the files, flipping through each one, searching for anything that might link Griffin to the underground network they suspected. It didn't take long. Amara found a folder that stood out. Its cover was marked with a strange symbol, one that looked like a combination of a serpent and a crown. She opened it cautiously, her heart racing as she scanned the contents. There were names, lots of them. Each one linked to powerful figures in the city. Business owners, local politicians, even a few law enforcement officers. But there was one name that stood out above the rest. Chadwick Hayes. The name sent a chill down her spine. Chadwick Hayes was one of the wealthiest men in the city, known for his connections to both legitimate businesses and the underworld. He was rumored to have his fingers in every pie: drugs, money laundering, and even human trafficking. Aaliyah leaned over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she saw the same name. "That's the puppet master," she said, her voice cold with realization. "He's the one behind it all." The twins gathered the files quickly, stuffing them into a bag they had brought for this purpose. They couldn't afford to stay any longer. They had what they needed, and it was time to leave before anyone discovered their presence. As they were about to exit the office, a sound stopped them in their tracks. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone was coming. Without a word, Amara grabbed Aaliyah's hand, pulling her into the nearest storage closet. They held their breath as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever it was just a few feet away now. The door to the office creaked as it opened, and they could hear Griffin's voice, low and conspiratorial. "Tonight's the night," he said. "Make sure they don't get away with this. Hayes won't tolerate failure." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had no idea how much time they had left, but one thing was certain. The fight was no longer just about defending themselves. It was about taking down the entire network. They had their proof. Now they had to survive long enough to expose it. Amara and Aaliyah had barely made it out of the gym when the weight of their discovery hit them. They had what they needed to bring down the entire operation, but now they had to figure out how to use it, and more importantly, how to survive the fallout that was sure to come. They knew Mr. Griffin and his associates wouldn't just let them walk away. It wasn't just about protecting the network anymore, it was personal. They had crossed a line, and now they were enemies of a dangerous underground empire. The twins were no longer just dealing with schoolyard bullies. They had inadvertently unleashed a force that would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. They walked through the empty hallways of their high school. The twins felt the weight of every corner, every shadow. They had learned to trust their instincts, to always be aware of their surroundings. But tonight they couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them, lurking just out of sight. "You feel it too, right?" Aaliyah whispered as they moved briskly toward the back exit of the school. "We're being hunted." Amara didn't need to answer. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, that uneasy sense that danger was closing in. They had to make it home. They had to lay low for the night, plan their next move, and figure out how to get the evidence to the authorities without getting caught. But as they pushed open the back door, the sharp sound of footsteps behind them made them freeze. They spun, around in unison, their hands instinctively reaching for the concealed weapons they kept hidden in their backpacks. But there was no immediate threat, just the shadowy figure of Tyler, their friend, looking more anxious than ever. "You guys have to go," Tyler said breathlessly, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "Griffin knows. He knows everything. I overheard him talking to Hayes's people. You're in way deeper than I thought. You need to get out of here now." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a look. Tyler had always been a good friend, but this was more than just high school drama. This was life and death. "We need to take this to the authorities," Aaliyah said urgently, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "We have proof. We can expose Griffin, Hayes, all of them. We just need to get it to the right people." Tyler shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand. They have people everywhere. If you go to the cops, they'll shut you down before you even get a chance to speak. They own half the law enforcement. They'll bury you." The twins' hearts sank. They had always known this battle was going to be tough, but they hadn't anticipated the full scope of the danger they were in. "We'll figure something out," Amara said, her voice hardening with resolve. "We can't back down now. We've come too far." Tyler shook his head again. "I'm not trying to scare you, but there's no way out unless you go underground. You need to disappear. They're already tracking you. You're not safe here anymore." Aaliyah stepped forward, her expression fierce. "Then help us, Tyler. Help us get out of here. You know how to get us the safe house. We need to lay low long enough to get the evidence to the right people, people who can actually do something about it." Tyler hesitated, looking like he was about to say something else, but then his eyes darted back toward the school. "You don't have time to argue. Griffin's people are already here. Go. Now." Without waiting for another word, Tyler took off into the shadows, disappearing into the night. Amara and Aaliyah didn't need to say anything else. They turned and sprinted for the nearest exit, cutting through the darkened streets as fast as they could. The twins arrived at the safe house just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The house was small and secluded, tucked away at the edge of town, far from the reach of anyone who might be looking for them. Tyler had managed to get them inside without anyone noticing, and now they were safe, at least for the moment. Inside the safe house, the twins finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe. They set the bag of files down on the kitchen table, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. They had the evidence, the names, the proof, but they still had to figure out how to get it into the right hands. "We need to make a plan," Amara said, her eyes focused on the pile of papers in front of them. "The authorities won't trust us. We can't just walk in and hand them the evidence. We need a way to prove it's legitimate." Aaliyah nodded in agreement. "We need allies, people who can help us. But we can't trust anyone we don't know already. Griffin and Hayes have spies everywhere." Amara's mind raced. She knew they needed to act quickly. The longer they stayed hidden, the more likely it was that Griffin's people would find them, and they wouldn't stop until they silenced the twins for good. There was one person they could trust, one person who had the resources to help them make their case. Aaliyah's old mentor, Detective Harris. He was a retired cop who had always supported the twins in their training and had a network of people who could be trusted to handle sensitive information. "If anyone can help us get this to the right people, it's him," Aaliyah said, already picking up her phone. "I'll call him." As Aaliyah dialed the number, Amara watched the clock on the wall, counting the seconds. Every minute they spent in the safe house brought them one step closer to being found. Come on," Amara muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the windows, watching for any sign of movement outside. Finally, Aaliyah spoke into the phone. "Harris, we need your help. It's urgent. We've got proof of a dangerous underground network, and we can't go to the cops. Griffin and Hayes, they're everywhere. We need to get this evidence into the right hands, and we need your help to do it safely." There was a long pause, and then Detective Harris's voice came through, low and serious. "I know who they are. I've been tracking them for years. Don't worry. We'll get this done. But you need to lay low. No more contact with anyone else. I'll set things up." Aaliyah hung up the phone and turned to Amara, a determined glint in her eyes. "It's done. We're getting this out and we're going to bring them down. But we need to be ready. Griffin will stop at nothing to make sure we're silenced." Amara's jaw tightened and she nodded. "Then let's make sure they regret underestimating us." The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. For the first time in what felt like forever, Amara and Aaliyah found themselves in a place where the danger wasn't breathing down their necks. The safe house was small, tucked away from the prying eyes of Griffin's associates, but it was also a reminder of how much was at stake. The twins had learned to fight against whatever life threw at them, but they were now fighting against something far more sinister than just school bullies. They had the evidence. They had the names of powerful people connected to the criminal network. But now they had to rely on people they trusted, and even more importantly, wait for the right moment to strike. In the quiet of the safe house, time seemed to stretch. The hours passed slowly, and Amara found herself staring at the pile of files on the table, her thoughts swirling. Her muscles ached from the constant tension of the past few days, but the adrenaline that had carried them this far refused to fade completely. Aaliyah was sitting across from her, looking just as intense, scrolling through her phone, her eyes scanning every message for signs of danger. "We can't just sit here forever," Amara finally said, breaking the silence. "We need to take action." Aaliyah glanced up from her phone. "I know, but we've already put ourselves out there. Griffin and his people are coming for us. If we act too soon, we risk making ourselves an even bigger target." Amara's fingers drummed on the table. Then what do we do, just wait? Aaliyah sighed and set her phone down. We need to be smart. We've got the evidence we need to expose the network. But we have to make sure the authorities are ready for what's coming. Harris said he's getting everything in motion on his end. We just need to keep a low profile. Amara wasn't convinced. They'd spent so much time running, hiding, and waiting that it felt wrong to just sit back now knowing what they had. They could take down Griffin, take down Hayes, bring the entire operation into the light. But how much time did they have? How long before Griffin came knocking? As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen and saw that it was a text from Tyler. They know. Griffin's people are already in motion. I just saw them moving through the city. They're hunting for you. Get out of there. Her heart skipped a beat. The storm was already rolling in, faster than they'd anticipated. We don't have time to wait, Amara said, a fierce determination rising in her chest. We need to take this to Harris right now. Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. You're right, let's get this over with, but we're sticking together, no more splitting up. They quickly gathered their things and stuffed the files back into the bag. Their minds were already racing through the logistics of getting to Harris, but one thing was clear, the clock was ticking. Every second they spent in the safe house made them more vulnerable. As they prepared to leave, Amara felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. This was what they'd been working toward all along. This was the moment where they could finally make a difference. No matter the cost, they couldn't turn back now. The twins stepped out of the safe house into the crisp night air. The city was eerily quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional passing car. It felt like the calm before a storm they knew was coming for them. They made their way through the back alleys, sticking to the shadows to avoid being seen. Their senses were heightened, every sound, every movement amplified in their ears. They moved quickly but cautiously, knowing that one wrong step could cost them everything. When they finally reached the abandoned warehouse where they were supposed to meet Harris, the area was quiet. Too quiet. Amara's pulse quickened. She scanned the surroundings, her eyes darting from one corner to the next, but there was no sign of movement. Something's off, Aaliyah murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara nodded, every muscle in her body tense. Stay alert. They walked toward the entrance of the warehouse, and just as they were about to push the door open, a voice rang out from the shadows. Looking for someone? The twins froze, their hands instantly reaching for the weapons they carried. A figure stepped out of the darkness, and their hearts sank as they recognized the face. It was Tyler, but his expression was different, cold, calculating, almost empty. What's going on, Tyler? Aaliyah asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Tyler's lips curled into a twisted smile. You two are more in over your heads than you realize. I tried to warn you, but now, it's too late. Amara's mind raced. This wasn't the Tyler. They knew. The boy who had helped them was gone, replaced by someone with a much darker purpose. You're working for them, aren't you? Amara's voice was low, dangerous. She wasn't going to let him manipulate them. Tyler's smile only grew. I've been working for Griffin and Hayes this whole time. You really thought you could expose them without any consequences? Aaliyah's eyes narrowed, her hands instinctively clenching into fists. You were just using us to get to the files, weren't you? Tyler shrugged. Not just the files. I wanted to see how far you two would go, but you're smarter than I gave you credit for. Now I have to deal with you. Before they could react, Tyler moved, pulling out a gun from inside his jacket. Amara's instincts kicked in, and in a flash she was on him, grabbing his wrist and twisting it with the precision of a black belt. The gun clattered to the ground. You think you're untouchable, Tyler, Amara hissed. We're not going down without a fight. Aaliyah stepped forward, her eyes burning with fury. You were a traitor from the start. You played us, but now you're going to pay for it. Tyler grimaced, trying to break free of Amara's grip, but it was useless. She had him in a hold that would have made even the toughest opponent submit. I'm not the one you should be worried about. Tyler sneered. You think you're the only ones with a plan? Griffin's already on his way here. You're too late. Aaliyah glanced at Amara, her jaw set. We're not too late. We've come this far. We're going to finish this. But before they could make another move, the distant sound of car engines reached their ears. The storm was no longer a prediction, it had arrived. The low hum of car engines grew louder with every passing second. Amara's heart raced and her grip on Tyler tightened. The twins didn't need to look around to know that this was it. Griffin's men were coming, and they were not going to show mercy. Tyler, still trapped in Amara's ironclad hold, grimaced, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're making a mistake," he spat. "You're not going to win this, it's over." Amara's eyes burned with determination. She had no intention of letting him get the last word. "You're not in control anymore, Tyler," she growled. "It's over for you too." Behind them, the sound of car doors slamming echoed in the night. The twins exchanged a quick glance, their minds already sinking in the way they always did when danger was near. They knew the drill. They had no choice now but to take the fight to Griffin's people, and they needed to move fast. Aaliyah stepped forward, ready to act. "We can't waste any more time with him. We've got bigger problems coming our way." Amara nodded, her fingers loosening around Tyler's wrist. She shoved him hard against the wall of the warehouse. He slumped to the ground, the shock of his betrayal cutting deeper than any physical pain. "You're on your own now," Amara said coldly, her voice unwavering. "Don't try to follow us, you'll regret it." Without another word, the twins turned toward the door of the warehouse, slipping inside just as the first shadowy figures appeared in the distance. Inside the dark warehouse, Amara and Aaliyah's footsteps echoed against the cold concrete floor. The place was silent, but it was only a matter of time before the chaos outside would spill in. The twins quickly moved toward a back storage room they'd scouted earlier, a place that would give them cover while they figured out what to do next. The heavy steel door creaked as they pushed it open, the space inside filled with boxes of old equipment and discarded furniture. It was cramped, but it was their only chance to regroup. "I can hear them coming," Aaliyah whispered, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they reach the door." Amara's mind raced. They needed a plan fast. But all she could think about was how much closer Griffin's people were getting. They had no time to hide. "We have one shot," Amara said, her voice low but steady. "We need to take down whoever comes through that door. They've been hunting us for days, and now we take the fight to them. No more running." Aaliyah grinned, the thrill of the challenge lighting up her eyes. "I'm ready, let's do this." Amara quickly examined the room, searching for anything they could use to their advantage. A few rusty pipes hung from the ceiling, and some heavy crates sat stacked against the walls. She grabbed a metal rod, testing its weight in her hand. "This'll work," she muttered. Aaliyah picked up a large wrench from the ground, twirling it in her hand like a seasoned fighter. "We don't need guns," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "We've got everything we need right here." Just as they prepared, the warehouse door swung open with a loud bang. 2 figures stepped inside, their silhouettes barely visible in the low light. Amara's heart hammered in her chest, her body primed for action. They were ready. Without warning, Amara and Aaliyah sprang into action, their movements a blur of precision and speed. Amara lunged forward, using the rod to block one of the men's punches, her body twisting as she delivered a sharp kick to his midsection. He stumbled back, stunned. Aaliyah wasn't far behind. She swung the wrench with deadly accuracy, knocking the second man off balance. He tried to recover, but Aaliyah was already on him, landing a punch square on his jaw. The men were experienced, but they weren't expecting this level of resistance. Amara and Aaliyah were faster, more skilled, and they fought like they had something to prove because they did. The first man, recovering from Amara's kick, swung a wild punch at her face. She dodged effortlessly, stepping to the side and bringing the rod down on his shoulder with a crack. He grunted in pain, falling to the floor with a thud. The second man, now on the ground, lunged toward Aaliyah, trying to grab her by the legs. But Aaliyah was already 2 steps ahead, using her wrench to strike him across the face. He collapsed in a heap. As they caught their breath, the twins exchanged a brief glance. They knew that these 2 were just the beginning. The others would be here any second. Amara's mind raced. There was no more running, no more hiding. This was the moment they had trained for. The only way out was to finish this, and to finish it fast. Suddenly, the sound of more footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the storage room. The twins turned toward the door, ready to face whatever came through, But then, a familiar voice rang out from the shadows, freezing them in their tracks. "Don't move." The voice was calm, authoritative, but there was something else in it, something that made the twins pause. It was Detective Harris. The voice of Detective Harris echoed in the silent warehouse, sending a chill down Amara and Aaliyah's spines. For a moment, they didn't know what to expect. Had Harris really come to help them, or was he working with Griffin all along? Their minds raced, trying to process the new twist in this dangerous game. Amara's grip on the metal rod tightened. "Harris?" she called out, her voice sharp but wary. "What are you doing here?" From the shadows, Harris stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He wasn't wearing his usual police uniform, but a simple jacket and jeans blending in with the darkness around them. His face was set in a serious expression, but there was no sign of aggression. "I'm here to help you," Harris said, his voice low. "But you need to listen to me fast." Aaliyah, still gripping the wrench, exchanged a look with her sister. They had no reason to trust him, not after everything they'd been through. But there was something about Harris that made them hesitate, something in his eyes that said he was on their side. "Help us," Amara repeated skeptically. "You're sure about that?" Harris nodded. "I've been tracking Griffin's network for a while. You two have been causing quite the stir. And I think it's time we end this." There was no time to debate. The distant sounds of more footsteps grew louder, more urgent. Harris's words rang in Amara's mind. "We need to end this." "We can't do this alone," Aaliyah said quietly, stepping forward and lowering her wrench. "What do you need from us?" Harris's expression softened, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "We take Griffin down tonight, but we need to move fast. We've got about 15 minutes before his backup arrives. If we're going to hit them where it hurts, we need to do it now." Amara nodded. "Then let's do it." The three of them quickly slipped out of the storage room and into the dark corridor of the warehouse. Harris led the way, his movements sure and confident, while the twins stayed close behind, alert for any signs of danger. As they made their way deeper into the building, Harris spoke quietly. "Griffin's network is bigger than you think. Hayes has been funneling money and weapons through a number of channels, but I've got the intel. The key to all of this is Hayes's private office. That's where they're keeping the most important files." Amara's eyes narrowed. "So we go for the office. What's the catch?" "The catch is that Griffin's personal bodyguards are there," Harris replied. "But we can handle them. The real problem is the security system. We'll need to disable it to get to the files." Aaliyah's lips curled into a grin. "Security system, huh? You're looking at two people who've broken into more places than I can count." Harris raised an eyebrow. "I figured as much, but just in case, I've got the backup plan." They reached a narrow hallway lined with doors, all of which were closed and silent. Harris paused, holding up a hand for them to stop. He pulled out a small device from his pocket and attached it to a nearby control panel on the wall. After a few tense moments, a soft click sounded, and the lights flickered. "The security's down," Harris said. "Now it's up to you." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in anticipation. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. They were about to take down Griffin, Hayes, and the entire criminal network that had tormented them for so long. Aaliyah turned to Harris. "You've got our backs?" "Always," Harris said, nodding firmly. "Now let's go." They moved swiftly through the hallway, each step taking them closer to the heart of the operation. As they approached the office, the faint sounds of muffled voices drifted from within. Amara held her breath, signaling for everyone to stop. She pressed her ear to the door, listening carefully. There was no doubt now Griffin's men were inside. "We've got to act fast," she whispered. "Once we go in, there's no turning." "Back," Aaliyah nodded. "Let's make it count." With one final look exchanged, the twins burst through the door. The room inside was dimly lit, but they could make out the figures of two men standing near a desk piled high with documents. Griffin was nowhere to be seen, but his presence loomed over the room like a dark cloud. Before the men could react, Amara and Aaliyah were already in motion. They moved with the grace of seasoned fighters, each one taking down a guard with quick, efficient strikes. Amara grabbed one by the wrist, twisting his arm behind his back, before flipping him onto the ground with a controlled maneuver. Aaliyah used the wrench she had grabbed earlier to knock out the second guard with a swift blow to the head. "Clear," Aaliyah said, her breath steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Harris quickly moved to the desk, rifling through the piles of papers and documents. "This is it," he muttered, pulling out a thick file and opening it. "These are the connections we need. The whole operation is here." Amara stepped forward, her eyes scanning the contents of the file. "This is it, isn't it? This is everything we need to bring them down." Harris nodded. "This proves everything, the corruption, the money laundering, the weapons deals. We've got them." A sudden sound from the hallway made all three of them freeze. Heavy footsteps. More of Griffin's men were coming. "We don't have much time," Amara said, her voice tense. "We need to get out of here, now." Just as the door to the office began to creak open, Amara and Aaliyah bolted toward the back of the room, grabbing Harris along the way. They didn't have the luxury of thinking. They had to move, and fast. They ran down the corridor, the sound of pounding footsteps close behind. The twins led the way, their training kicking in as they navigated the maze-like hallways. Harris followed closely, the documents clutched tightly in his hand. But as they turned a corner, they were confronted with a wall of men, guns drawn, blocking their only escape route. It was the end of the line. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor as Amara, Aaliyah, and Harris skidded to a stop, facing a wall of armed men blocking their way. The hallway was narrow, and their escape route was quickly closing in. Amara's breath came fast, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew they had only one option now: fight. "Back up," she hissed, her voice low but filled with authority. Her eyes flicked to Aaliyah, and the twins didn't need to speak. They were already moving, instinctively ready to take on whatever came next. Harris, behind them, looked panicked but resolute. "There's no way out of this one unless we fight." "Our way through," he said, gripping the file tightly. "I've got the intel. You get us out of here and we can take Griffin down." Amara's jaw tightened. This was the moment. No more hesitation. They had to get out alive, and they had to take down Griffin's operation once and for all. One of the men in front of them, a hulking figure with a scar running down his face, stepped forward. "You two are really making this harder than it needs to be," he sneered, aiming his gun at Aaliyah. "Put the weapons down and we won't shoot." Aaliyah's lips curled into a smirk. "You think we're stupid enough to fall for that? Without—" Another word. Aaliyah lunged, swinging the wrench in a deadly arc. The man barely had time to react before it collided with his arm, knocking the gun from his grip. He grunted in pain, but before he could recover, Amara was on him. With a quick jab to his ribs, she sent him crashing to the ground. The other men didn't hesitate. They opened fire. The world around them seemed to slow as Amara ducked behind a metal pillar, narrowly avoiding a bullet that whizzed past her ear. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her focus was razor-sharp. She could hear Aaliyah's voice, sharp and commanding, as she shouted for them to move. "Don't stay in one place too long." "They'll corner us." Amara nodded, her mind calculating the best way to move through this mess. They couldn't stay here. The walls were closing in, and if they didn't act quickly, they'd be trapped. "Move! Move! Move!" Aaliyah shouted, as she tossed a metal crate toward the group of armed men. The crate hit the floor with a loud bang, sending a shockwave through the air, and the men momentarily faltered, unsure of what was happening. Amara didn't waste a second. She sprinted forward, her body a blur of motion as she dodged incoming fire. She reached one of the guards, grabbed him by the collar, and flipped him over her shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. Aaliyah was right, behind her, delivering a crushing blow to another guard's chest with the wrench. The man staggered back, gasping for air, but before he could react, Aaliyah landed a swift roundhouse kick to his head, knocking him unconscious. Amara didn't have time to celebrate. The other men were closing in. There were still too many of them, and even the twins' skill and speed weren't enough to take them all down at once. The air was thick with tension as the remaining guards advanced. "Harris!" Amara shouted over her shoulder, barely dodging another bullet. "Do you have a plan here?" Harris, crouched behind cover, his face pale but determined, nodded quickly. "I've got the key to the security system. If I can get to the main panel, I can lock the doors. You just need to buy me time." Amara glanced at Aaliyah, who was already anticipating the next move. They'd never back down. "Not now." "We'll cover you," Aaliyah said, her voice fierce. Just get us to that panel. Harris moved quickly, darting toward the far end of the hall, with Amara and Aaliyah providing cover. The sound of gunfire filled the air as the twins used every ounce of their training to neutralize anyone who came too close. Amara threw herself into the fight, taking down one more guard with a spinning kick to the chest before turning to check on Harris. He was almost there. Just a few more steps, but then a loud shout came from behind them. "No, don't let them get to the panel!" The lead guard, the one who had initially taunted them, was back on his feet, rushing toward Harris with a vicious snarl on his face. He was too fast, too close. "Not on my watch," Aaliyah hissed, charging forward. With one swift motion, she slammed the wrench into his side, knocking him off balance. But the guard was determined. He swung his arm at her, knocking her to the ground. Amara saw red. Without thinking, she sprinted toward the man, her fists flying. In a flash, she landed a series of quick punches to his face, each one pushing him back until he collapsed, unconscious. "Go!" Amara shouted at Harris, urgency in her voice. "You've got to finish this." Harris was there, his fingers flying over the control panel, his face a mask of concentration. The seconds felt like hours as he worked furiously. Finally, there was a click. The doors to the warehouse slammed shut with a deafening sound, locking the remaining guards inside. "We did it," Harris said, breathing a sigh of relief. "The doors are locked. They're trapped in there with no way out." But even with the guards contained, the twins knew that the battle was far from over. They still had one more enemy to face. "Griffin." "Let's finish this," Amara said. Her voice steady but cold. She turned to Aaliyah, who gave her a determined nod. They had made it this far. It was time to end Griffin's reign. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone Griffin had hurt, for every life his operation had destroyed, and they wouldn't stop until he was brought down. The adrenaline was still coursing through Amara's veins as she and Aaliyah moved cautiously toward the heart of the warehouse. The men were locked away behind the heavy doors, but there was no mistaking the sense of dread hanging in the air. The twins had faced countless dangers, but now it was all coming down to this one final confrontation. Harris led the way, still clutching the file tightly in his hands. "Griffin's office is just ahead," he said quietly, his voice steady but low. "He won't be alone, but he's going to be expecting you two. Don't let your guard down." Amara's fingers flexed, ready for whatever was coming. She could feel her pulse pounding in her temples, her senses sharp. "We've come this far," she said, her voice calm but full of resolve. "There's no turning back now." Aaliyah gave her a small nod, her eyes never leaving the path ahead. "Let's take him down for good." The trio moved through the maze of dimly lit corridors, their steps measured and cautious. Each corner they turned brought them closer to their goal, and each shadow they passed could be hiding another threat. But the twins weren't afraid. They had fought their way out of too many impossible situations to be scared now. As they rounded the final corner, they saw it. Griffin's office door was ajar, a faint light spilling out from the crack. Harris raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. "Wait," he whispered. "We don't know how many men he has left in there. He could be expecting us." Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a quick look. "We'll handle it," Amara said, determination in her voice. "You just stay out of the way." Harris hesitated, but then nodded, stepping back to allow them to take the lead. Amara pushed the door open with a quick motion, her heart racing in her chest. The office was spacious, with dark wood furniture and expensive decor, but the comfort of the room felt out of place. The walls, lined with shelves of paperwork and files, couldn't hide the darkness of what had been going on behind them. At the far end of the room, Griffin sat behind a massive desk, his eyes narrowed. As he watched the door open, he wasn't alone. Two heavily armed guards flanked him, their eyes scanning the room for any threat. "Well, well," Griffin said, his voice dripping with smugness. "If it isn't the famous twins, you really think you can just walk in here and stop me?" Amara stepped forward, her stance defensive but firm. "It's over, Griffin, you're done." Griffin laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Done? You think you can take me down? You're nothing but a couple of street fighters. This whole operation has been years in the making. I won't let it all fall apart because of a couple of kids." Aaliyah's eyes burned with fury, but she stayed calm. "You underestimate us. You've been running from the law for too long. It's time for you to face the consequences. Griffin's eyes flicked to his guards, and with a subtle motion, they drew, their guns aiming them directly at Amara and Aaliyah. You really think you're in control here? Griffin sneered. I'll put an end to you both. In an instant, Amara and Aaliyah moved. They were faster than anyone could have anticipated. Amara grabbed the nearest chair and flung it at one of the guards, knocking him off balance. Aaliyah was already in motion, using her long legs to sweep the second guard's feet out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. Griffin's face twisted in rage. Get them! But it was too late. The twins were already upon him. Amara reached for Griffin's collar, pulling him out of his chair with a single powerful movement. He tried to fight back, swinging a fist toward her, but she dodged easily, her reflexes honed from years of training. You're not getting away, she spat, shoving him back toward the desk. Aaliyah, in the meantime, had neutralized the second guard with a swift kick to his chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. Griffin growled, his eyes burning with hatred. You think you've won? He snarled. I still have connections. This is just a setback. You'll never be free of me. Amara's eyes darkened as she stepped closer to him. No more talking. This ends now. With a swift motion, she grabbed a nearby lamp, swinging it toward Griffin's head. The blow landed with a sickening crack, and Griffin crumpled to the floor unconscious before he could say another word. Aaliyah walked over to check on the guards, making sure they were out cold. She turned back to Amara, a small smile tugging at her lips. That was almost too easy. Amara didn't smile. She knew this wasn't over, not really. We still need to make sure he doesn't have any other surprises. She walked over to Griffin's desk and grabbed the thick file that Harris had given them earlier. With shaking hands, she flipped it open and began to scan the pages. The information inside was damning. Proof of Griffin's entire criminal network, his money laundering operations, and connections to corrupt politicians. Is this it? Aaliyah asked, peering over her sister's shoulder. Is this everything we need to take him down? Amara nodded, a grim determination settling over her. It's enough. We've got everything. We just need to get this to the right people. Just as they were about to leave, a familiar voice interrupted them. Leaving so soon? Amara and Aaliyah turned in shock to see Harris standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. What's going on? Aaliyah asked, her heart sinking. Had Harris betrayed them? But Harris just smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. I knew this day was coming, and I knew I couldn't do it alone. You two, you've got the guts to finish this. I just gave you the tools. Aaliyah blinked, confused. What do you mean? Harris stepped forward, holding up his phone. I've already called in the authorities. You won't have to worry about Griffin anymore, but you've still got work to do. His network is bigger than just him. Amara stared at him, the weight of the moment sinking in. You've been helping us all along? Harris nodded. I've been keeping an eye on Griffin for a long time. You two were the missing piece. Now let's make sure he's locked away for good. As the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, Amara and Aaliyah shared a look. It was finally over. But they knew deep down that this victory wasn't just about taking down Griffin. It was about taking back their lives. The harsh lights of the police cars bathed the warehouse in a cold glow, flashing through the cracks in the windows as the authorities poured in. The twins stood at the threshold of Griffin's office, the file now securely in Amara's hands, but their minds were still racing, processing everything that had happened. It was hard to fully grasp that it was finally over. Griffin was down and the entire network was about to crumble. Let's go, Harris said, breaking the silence. He gestured toward the exit, his voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. Before any more of his men show up. Amara glanced at Aaliyah, who nodded silently. The weight of the last few hours was catching up to them, but neither of them showed any signs of slowing down. This was their moment. The moment they had fought for, bled for, and nearly died for. As they walked through the back corridors of the warehouse, the sounds of sirens grew louder, a reminder that they hadn't just brought down a man, but an entire criminal empire. The twins exchanged a look, both of them aware of the journey that had led them here, of the anger, the pain, the betrayal, and yet there was something else now. Something deeper than just victory. There was hope, I can't believe it's finally over, Aaliyah said quietly, her voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. We did it. We really did it. Amara's lips curved slightly, though her eyes were still hard, still determined. We did, but it's not just about Griffin. This is bigger than him. There's a lot more work to be done. Aaliyah stopped walking for a moment, her expression serious. You're right. The people who supported him, they need to be taken down too. They can't just walk free. I know, Amara agreed, her voice low but unwavering. But we can't do it alone. Not anymore. It's time to let the right people handle the rest. We've done our part. They reached the back of the warehouse where a black SUV was waiting. Harris had already made the call, and soon the authorities would be all over the place, taking Griffin and his associates into custody. Amara and Aaliyah climbed into the vehicle, Harris in the front seat, his eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. Where to? He asked, his tone casual, but his eyes were filled with something deeper, something like gratitude. Home, Aaliyah said after a beat. We need a moment to breathe, to process everything. Amara sat back in her seat, staring out the window. As the city lights blurred past, the world outside the SUV felt so different from the chaos of the warehouse, and yet it all felt oddly familiar. Like they had never left. They had fought so hard to be free from the shadow of Griffin and everything he represented. Now, it was finally happening. They were free. But freedom wasn't a destination. It was a journey. The drive back to their apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the distant sounds of the city. The night was clear, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the air seemed a little bit lighter. The weight that had pressed down on their shoulders for so long was beginning to lift. And while the journey was far from over, the twins could finally breathe. As they arrived at their building, the city seemed to stretch out before them, full of possibilities. The fight was over, but their story was far from finished. Inside their apartment, the twins sat on the couch, still not quite believing what they had just done. Amara laid the file down on the coffee table, its contents now in the hands of the authorities. The truth was out. Griffin's empire would soon be nothing more than a memory. Do you think it's really over? Aaliyah asked quietly, breaking the silence. Her eyes were filled with uncertainty, but there was a flicker of hope there too. Amara glanced over at her sister, her expression softer than it had been in days. It's over for us. We've made it out. But the world, the fight for real change, it doesn't end here. Aaliyah's eyes hardened, but there was something more in her gaze now, a resolve that matched her sister's. We'll keep fighting. For those who can't fight for themselves, we won't stop. Amara nodded, a sense of peace finally settling over her. We'll make sure we leave this world better than we found it. Together. As the night stretched on, the twins found themselves quietly reflecting on everything that had led them here. The battles, the pain, the losses, but also the strength they had gained from each other. They had fought for their survival, and in the process, they had forged something stronger than they had ever realized, a bond that nothing could break. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?